Well, I've been debating whether I should just wait until this is all over and talk about it in the morning. But tonight is the Hawkeye Cauci, also known as the Iowa Caucus. Using the term Hawkeye Cauci in honor of Rush Limbaugh, who apparently will not be with us too much longer because he just announced that he has stage 4 cancer. While I'm not a big listener of Rush's or whatever, I do respect him as a broadcaster. There are only a few people who have ever walked this earth that truly personify the medium of radio, and while radio is on its way out, it is sort of being reborn right now through the podcast arena, and frankly, I guess you could say that even what I'm doing is sort of a derivative of what the radio guys pioneered. But before I, go and eulogize the guy before he's even dead, I think I should move on to actually talking about the Hawkeye Cauci. Pretty much everyone, who talks about these things, other than me, has, done a lot of coverage, I'm sure, beaten it into the ground, talking about how Bernie, over the last few weeks, has really surged and has finally had his real good spike, which every candidate kind of has in an election cycle. Everyone has, that period where they're the flavor of the month, and you always want to time that, right in line with Iowa if you can, so that you can get that sort of initial boost of momentum going into the start of the primary season. And luckily for Bernie, the stars have aligned. And right now he seems to be peaking. This is the best that he's done pretty much, for the entire campaign. And the betting markets are now favoring him quite heavily. Old Biden has faded. Bernie is in front now to win the overall nomination, and he's way out in front to win Iowa. And of course, after Iowa, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that he's going to win New Hampshire, since New Hampshire is a right next to his home state, and frankly, geographically, a lot of people can't tell the difference between New Hampshire and Vermont. And so I'm sure there are a lot of voters that don't even realize that they live in New Hampshire versus Vermont. I mean, it's such a fine line there. And so it really was important for old Joe Biden to try and have at least a decent showing in Iowa and show that that Bernie is sort of a one-state wonder, kind of like John Kasich. That would have been the good thing to do, would be to hey, let Bernie win his one state that we know he's going to win, but let's shut him out everywhere else. Because, in the later states, especially, once you get to Super Tuesday and you have, what some folks call the SEC primary on Super Tuesday, all the southern states and such, you get into territory where Bernie is not polling very well. Of course, there's a lot of black voters down there, and black people historically have not really voted for Bernie. Bernie lives in a very, 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 very white state. And when he ran for president in 2016, black people didn't really vote for him at all. And so old Joe Biden has been trying to hold out until we get to where the black vote is important, and get through these early lily white states. Because, in the polling right now, even though Bernie is peaking right now, or arguably peaking, at least he's really he's doing better now than he has throughout the whole campaign. He's still not pulling ahead in Nevada and South Carolina, which are the next two states after Iowa and New Hampshire. But if Bernie's able to pull out a win in Iowa, and then goes on, of course, to win New Hampshire almost undoubtedly, once he has the momentum from Iowa, will his momentum be good enough then to try and put a stop to Biden in Nevada? And hey, let's say that Bernie doesn't win Nevada, because I believe Nevada comes before South Carolina in the Democratic lineup. It might be South Carolina. It's one of the two that comes next after New Hampshire. But anyway, if Bernie does unexpectedly well, even if he doesn't win, if Biden looks like he has a weak win after losing the first two states, that might still add yet more to Bernie's momentum. And so I think that in the eyes of a lot of people, Iowa this year, even though folks have been trying to play it down and say, oh, Iowa doesn't matter that much, Iowa doesn't determine the nominee, they've listed all of these occasions in which the winner of Iowa never goes on to win the nomination, and blah, blah, blah. And I think the reason why you're seeing that this time around in the election being pushed so much in the media is because people are afraid that he's going to win and that this is going to pick up momentum. I think it's very possible that the Democratic nomination is decided tonight. To say that Iowa and New Hampshire don't matter anymore is dumb, because it's circumstantial. Depends on the year. Depends on how things are lined up. It depends on how the polling looks forward. Because the thing is that Iowa isn't directly going to determine who the nominee is, but it determines where we stand when the next primary contest comes up, because we don't have this like some national primary vote to where everyone votes at once in all these elections. The results of the previous primaries set up the expectations for the next primaries. Okay, and so that's how you win these things, is by building momentum. And so let's bring up, I don't know, who was it, Ron Paul or Rick Santorum, that won in, depending on how you want to look at it, in Iowa back in, 2008 or 2012? Because, of course, in 2012, the way that the caucuses work is that Rick Santorum won the caucus vote. He won the vote on caucus night, but all the people who were elected, I guess, the delegates ended up supporting Ron Paul. So that, but for the sake of the momentum race, Santorum actually won that, because he won on caucus night. So he had the momentum moving forward. Ron Paul didn't. And then, of course, Rick Santorum's campaign went nowhere. And that's because Romney, who was already the favorite to win, went on to win New Hampshire. It's not like, Rick Santorum won the first two states. If you win the first two states, well then, you can build a little bit of momentum. If you win one and you lose one, well then, you're not going to have that same effect. So to say that, Iowa doesn't matter because in all these other cases, the guy who won Iowa didn't win, is again, but stupid. You have to look at the circumstances of each year. And so in this case, in this particular year, winning Iowa will have an outsized effect on helping Bernie's and catapulting Bernie's campaign versus everyone else's campaign. Okay, so it's not like winning Iowa is going to be so great for Joe Biden. It's just going to it's going to stave off. It's going to help him avoid getting a gashing wound from Bernie, you see here, because winning Iowa is going to help Joe Biden campaign stay about the same. But if Bernie wins, like I said, it's going to elevate him much higher than he is right now, nationally speaking. Because you have the bandwagoning effect of people who see a winner on TV and they say, well, I want to support the winner. And people go out and they vote for that because they think that he's inevitable at that point. And then on the other side, you have people who don't support these particular candidates saying, oh, well, he looks inevitable now, so I'm not going to go out and vote. What's the point? He's already won. And that's why the media is trying to downplay the importance of Iowa here, so that the anti-Bernie voters, I think, don't get discouraged. And so I think the Sanders camp really needs to try and manage the narrative here, because if they're able to pull out this win in Iowa, which it looks like they will be able to, unless Joe Biden somehow wins in an upset. Because remember, the nature of caucus voting is that passion really helps you. That's why Ron Paul was able to do so well in the Iowa caucuses, because he had very passionate supporters that went in and argued for his case in the actual caucuses. The same thing can happen here, I think, for Bernie if his supporters aren't too autistic. Biden, on the other hand, is much less likely to have his people go in there and be able to win over voters. Biden supporters are not going to have the passion or the drive, I think, to try and win over more people. So Biden's support, I think, in the caucus is going to be limited mostly to how he's polling. Now, on the other side, you might be able to argue that because the supporters of the other candidates who are perhaps not pro-Bernie, let's say the pro-Pete Buttigieg people, okay, let's say the Biden people are able to convince them that, hey, you don't like Bernie, we don't like Bernie, let's band together because Pete's not going to win, and let's just say, hey, anybody but Bernie, and let's go for Biden. Perhaps Biden's supporters will be able to swing a few people, if they're smart, in the actual caucuses, using that tactic. And, these sorts of variables are what I think makes, watching a caucus so much more interesting than a primary vote. I find voting just to be so boring and bland. Caucuses are dynamic and have the potential to perform differently than what we see in the polls. So that's what I'll be watching for tonight. I'll try and do an update tomorrow. If there isn't any very pressing Wu-Flu news to talk about, sort of doing a recap of the Hawkeye Cauci, especially things, especially if Biden wins out somehow, or even if Bernie does, I think I should rethink and try and go over and make sure that what I've said today actually holds up. So if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.